This is NextGen Indiana, where young Hoosiers talk politics.
Fight for progress, and shape Indiana's future.
From Indianapolis to Fort Wayne, Bloomington to the region, we're the next generation that won't wait our turn.
This is NextGen Indiana, the voice of young Hoosiers claiming our political power.
Welcome to NextGen Indiana. My name is Ben Branco. This is the political podcast for young Hoosiers by young Hoosiers. And this is our first part in a three-part series. We're going to interview all the Democratic nominee statewide candidates, so including Secretary of State, Treasurer, and Comptroller. Today is our Secretary of State episode. And we're joined today by seventh-generation Hoosier, attorney, Harvard lacrosse player, Marine Corps veteran. I figured I'd throw that one in there.
Yeah.
Marine Corps veteran, and most importantly, Democratic nominee for Secretary of State, Beau Bayh. Beau, thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. You know, it's been a long time since I played college sports. If I tried to do anything remotely close to that, now I'd have a catastrophic hamstring injury. But I appreciate you hyping me up, Ben.
Well, of course, I had to throw it in there. Today we're going to get into Beau's background as well as what a Secretary of State actually does and what he plans to bring to the office, as well as the stakes for young people, young Hoosiers here in Indiana, and a little bit about the current state of the race. But before we get into all that, Beau, I'm going to give you a brief chance to introduce yourself, and then as well as my two hosts here will introduce themselves as well, and we'll get right into it. So, Beau, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, my name is Beau Bayh, and as Ben mentioned, I'm the Democratic nominee for Indiana Secretary of State. And, you know, I'm the seventh generation of my family born here in the state of Indiana, and I was kind of raised in a family of public servants. And I was always taught growing up, you know, no one forces you to enter public life, but if you do that, you ought to do it to help your community, your state, your country, and not yourself. And too often today, we're seeing folks here in Indiana and at the federal level that are seeking public office, holding public office to enrich themselves, to help themselves, and for personal gain. And so that kind of offends my sense of what public service should be. And, you know, my path to public service looked a little bit different a little different than some of my other family members. I joined the United States Marine Corps. I was an infantry officer. I became an attorney where I've helped people vindicate their rights in the federal courts. And I hope to continue kind of this path to public service through this office. It's a very important one. And I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more about it.
Connor, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Connor Phillips. I am a rising junior at Wabash College, studying political science with a minor in rhetoric. And I'm hoping to, try and serve my community, kind of what Beau was saying, in a way that actually positively affects people someday.
Hi, everyone. My name's Diane or Valentino. I always like to leave my pronouns as well. I use she, her, AR pronouns. I am a student and also lifelong Hoosier. Thanks so much for being with us, Beau. I want to go ahead and start a segment, which is kind of talking about your background and your story. So I know that you come from well, first off, thank you for joining us. I know your schedule is super busy, so thank you for joining us. I want to start by saying that. But you come from a family that's, deeply connected to Indiana politics. So growing up, what lessons did you take away from watching your parents serve? And how has that influenced the kind of leader that you want to be?
Yeah, so, and this is not unique to me. A lot of young people grow up and they see whatever their family members are doing and the impact that they're able to have on their community and their world and the way that they're able to improve, the lives of those around them. Of course, that makes an impact on you growing up. And so it just happened to be that my granddad and my dad were involved in political life, but that did impact me. So, for example, one of the things that I'm most proud of that my granddad was able to do in his service to our country in the United States Senate was author a law called Title IX, which has allowed women at a time in our country where there were no women's athletics. Essentially, it mandated that colleges offer equal access to women in sports as they do the boys. And so every time I see Caitlin Clark or Sophie Cunningham or some other superstar woman athlete, I think a little bit about him and the millions of girls all over our country that look up to those types of people and try and achieve not only in sports but in other areas of their life and the impact that he was able to have. When my dad was governor of our state, he instituted the 21st Century Scholars Program. I'm not sure if any of you guys are familiar with that, but basically it's a program that's allowed hundreds of thousands of Hoosier kids to go to college and obtain a college education debt-free and live amazing, fulfilling lives. And as we all know in this call, student loans are one of the biggest issues facing young people. And he was, that's a program that I believe our state should expand to help more young kids go to college. So just getting back to the root of your question, of course, those things affected me when I was growing up. And there's a million different ways to serve your community that don't involve putting your name on the ballot. It's just one of them. But I was seeing the impact. I witnessed the impact firsthand growing up that you were able to have in public life. And so that inspired me to try and make the same kind of positive change in my own career.
Well, yeah, that's really awesome, Bo. I'm curious, was there ever a point where you weren't sure that politics was the path that you wanted to take? What did your parents teach you that you think is missing from politics today?
Yeah, my dad retired briefly and then ran for the Senate again in 2016, and I helped him on that campaign when I was going into my junior year in college. And I mean, I was a little biased. I think my dad's the best guy ever, and I think he's smart. I think he's honest, high character, all those things. And I saw that he lost that election, and so it kind of, for a little bit in the aftermath of that, it kind of turned me off from politics because I said, look, I think he's the right person for this job on the merits. I think he's the best person for this job. And ultimately, there are things in electoral politics that it sometimes doesn't come down to who the best person is for the job. There are forces outside of your control that you just can't put your finger on that just determine the outcome of an election. And sometimes it's not always a meritocratic process. And so that kind of got me a little bit off the track of politics. But then some time passes and you realize, you look at the state of our country, you look at the state that we all love, and you realize that things are not headed in a good direction. And you can't just be cynical. You can't throw your hands up. You can't say, I'm not going to get involved. In fact, if you love your country, if you love your state like I do, you have to raise your hand. You have to volunteer. You have to run for office. You have to help those who do run for office, because that's the only way that we're going to make change. We're not going to change anything by sitting on the sidelines.
Absolutely. Um, Thank you so much for answering those questions, Bo. I kind of want to move into my next question, which is, when everyone sees the campaign, everyone sees campaigns, right? They see the campaign, I don't think they actually see the work that goes into it, right? Campaigns don't show the full person. So outside of politics, what experiences have shaped your values the most?
Yeah, probably the experience that shaped my value the most is being in the United States Marine Corps. And there's a lot. Look, there's a lot of great things about our nation's military. Probably the best part about it is that the military, the Marine Corps, draws from every walk of life in our country, all different age groups, all different socioeconomic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, gender, you name it. And what that allowed me to see is just be a part of units that are extremely diverse ideologically, socioeconomically, the rest, and be in charge, be in command of those people, and try and get all of these disparate groups of people that may disagree a lot of the time oriented on achieving a common mission. And that's really good leadership experience that I got at a young age, and that has kind of shaped my worldview. Because ultimately, I'd like to see the same thing happen in our politics, where we take groups of people that come from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds, that maybe don't agree on every issue, but despite those disagreements, we're able to come together and achieve some really big things. That's the kind of structural change that our country needs right now, that our state needs. And so I think if we could bring more of the leadership style that some men and women in the United States military exhibit into our politics, that'd be a good thing. And that's what I'm trying to do.
I'm coming from a family who comes from military service. I think that is so beautifully said, Bo. Thanks so much for that.
So you were making your bed growing up then?
I was making my bed every morning. And yep, indeed. You've Next question is, you've built your career outside of elected office before deciding to run. So why is now the right time?
Yeah. So the current Secretary of State, Diego Morales, has used his office not as a means to benefit our state, but as a means to enrich himself, his friends, and his family, and inject partisan politics into our electoral process where it shouldn't be. And the stakes have never been higher. Trust in government, trust in elected officials is at an all-time low. And this particular office, the Secretary of State, is the chief election officer of our state. And in your hands is the health of potentially our country's most precious resource, the health of our democratic process. And when that office is being entrusted to someone who I don't think is an honorable person, that's what ultimately led me to decide to make a change. And we ran such a strong campaign that they've now replaced Diego Morales at the Republican convention. They've replaced him with someone who's no better and who's endorsed all of the insider dealing and the corruption and the injection of partisan politics into our elections that Diego Morales stood for. And so this is a very important office. It's not currently in good hands, and we can't let that kind of trend of corruption and machine politics continue. That's what's ultimately led me to try and make a change here.
I think you said that so well and perfect, Bo. He is trying to enrich himself and his peers and all, the folks in his corner. And I think that that is something that, folks haven't, a lot of people don't know what the Secretary of State necessarily does, right? So I think that is so beautifully said. And it's not a position where you're supposed to be enriching yourself and your friends. You're supposed to be serving folks. You're supposed to be
That's
making
fair.
sure folks understand what is happening with elections and civic education and all these different things, right? Um, my last question for you is: if someone met Beau Bayh outside of a campaign event, what would surprise them the most about you?
Oh, wow, that's a good one. I think the fact that I love just being around my family. And so like I think in politics, you have to be, to a certain extent, you have to be an extrovert, and you have to, and which I love. Like one of my favorite things about doing this is just meeting so many different people throughout our state. And so maybe when people meet me and you see me just shaking hands with everyone, saying hi with everyone, I'd say hi to everyone. You wouldn't expect me to just like to hang out with my brother and watch a football game by ourselves on a Friday night. Maybe you'd expect me to be at a restaurant saying, continuing to say hi to people, but I really just love spending time with my family, private time like that, traveling with my dad and my brother. Maybe that's something that people wouldn't necessarily take away.
I love that. That's awesome. Well, I want to go ahead and pass it off to, or unless somebody else, I just want to make sure neither one of my co-hosts have another question before we transition into SOS 101.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think Gianna, you touched on it earlier. Secretary of State is this hugely important office, but not really many people know exactly what a Secretary of State does, and especially at a time when that office is being used to enrich the current office holder personally, and it's really being extremely mismanaged. So, Bo, my question for you is give us like a Secretary of State crash course. If you were elected, what
Yeah.
would your day-to-day actually look like? What would you be managing?
Yeah, so there's four divisions of this office. The one that everyone kind of knows, that's probably the most attention the public gives, is the elections division, where you're in charge of executing state election law and federal law and making sure that our elections run smoothly, that people, that they're actually being able to exercise their most fundamental right, their right to vote. So that's very important. You have the business division of this office. Every new entrepreneur in our state, when they decide to found their business, does that through the Secretary of State's office. And so one of the most important things that this office does, or at least it should do, is be a good partner to those entrepreneurs that are taking on a lot of risk, starting new great creative businesses that create good jobs for people and fuel our economy. There's the securities division of this office. So when a broker dealer offers a security in our state, they have to register that security with the Secretary of State's office, and this office is entrusted with investigating allegations of securities fraud in our state. And I'm an attorney, and one of the things that I've done in my in my career as a lawyer is handle securities fraud investigations at the federal level. I want to bring some of that experience here to the state level. And then the fourth part of this office is the auto dealer division, where there's all types of rules and regulations that govern the way that auto dealers have to operate in our state. And so that doesn't get, as you can imagine, doesn't get a ton of scrutiny in the public eye, but it's a very, very important job responsibility at this office as well.
Yeah, I'm sure you're running for Secretary of State because you want to oversee all those car dealerships. That's
Well,
probably
again,
that's probably
it's an important
the
job.
most
When
attractive part.
I was in Kokomo a few years ago, I was getting a used car, and
Hmm.
I learned, like when you purchase a car in our state, there's a certain amount of time that the dealer has to deliver you title of the car, and if they don't do that, like let's say I buy my used Jeep and they just never send me title. Like the Secretary of State's responsible for coming in and saying, "Hey, this guy bought this car. You got to give him actually the legal document that says that he owns it, right?" So that's an important thing because a lot of people's
Yeah,
net worth is wound up into big assets like that, and we want to make sure that people are playing by the rules. But you're right; it doesn't get as much attention.
yeah. No, that's for sure. That's interesting and not really like like we're saying, like not one of the things you would think Secretary of State would be in charge of, but that's important. That's people's, everyday lives.
Mhm.
Um, Going back to the kind of like the election security part, and more specifically like the voter registration part. This morning, I was reading a shout out to the Capitol Chronicle, but I was reading an article that there's a Johnson County woman who had her voter registration. Um, it got canceled, and the Secretary of State's office didn't notify her. She just logged on to check her registration, and her registration wasn't active anymore. And she found out she wasn't eligible. It was a whole mess, had to get figured out. I think eventually she got her voter registration restored. But it seems like we're at a time where if the Secretary of State, how do you protect against like just the Secretary of State coming in and like canceling your voter registration? So how are you going to enshrine and protect people's voter registrations, I guess?
Well, look, man, we got to elect someone who actually wants more people and not fewer people participating in our elections. Because right now, Diego Morales wants as few people as possible. That's why him and Todd Rokita litigated against or in favor of the student ID ban that I'm sure has affected
Mhm.
all of you and your friends. Like they
Yeah.
want as few people as possible participating in our elections. I want as many voices who are eligible to participate as possible because I think we're at our best as a state and as a country when we have more voices in the conversation, even people that don't agree with me all the time, when we're competing in the marketplace of ideas, that's where we're at our best as a country and as a state. So the first thing we need to do is I hope people will support this campaign because fundamentally and ideologically, I want more voices in our democracy and not fewer. And one of the things that Diego Morales has done, which should concern every single Hoosier in our state, is that without even being asked, he delivered wholesale the personal information, the personal identifying information of millions of registered Hoosier voters to the federal government, to Pam Bondi, without even a
Mhm.
request being made to the Department of Justice. We don't know what that information is being used for. Maybe it's being used for some of the nefarious things that you're talking about, kicking people off, canceling voter registrations, and the rest. We can't have that. If people are eligible to vote in our state, they should be given a fair opportunity and a fair shot to have their voice heard, regardless of whether or not they support you or the other person.
Yeah. I think, that's such the important mindset shift that's really like at odds with this race is like one side, wants more people engaged in the Pacific process, wants more people voting, like you said, no matter what their political affiliations are. Because when we have more people participating, the system's going to work better and it's going to work better for all of us. Kind of touching on like the last piece you said, definitely not the most transparent thing a Secretary of State's office could do. And a big part of your campaign is just that, cleaning up the corruption and the transparency and making the office more transparent. I'm curious, what is your plan for actually accomplishing that?
Yeah, so I've been just clear since day one on the campaign trail. My first act as Secretary of State will be to open an independent audit of this office to just break open the books. We know what's in the public right now. The $92,000
Mhm.
SUV that everyone on this call paid for, that Diego Morales still rides around in. The hiring his brother-in-law to a six-figure salary at the taxpayer expense. Traveling all over the world for Lord knows what purpose, won't tell us who's paying for the trips, millions of dollars in no bid contracts to his largest campaign donors. All right. So that's the blatant corruption that we know. It's like an iceberg, you only see 10% of it. The 90% lurking underneath the surface, we don't know about. And we don't know who else is complicit. And guess what? If Max Engling is in this office, he's going to sweep that all under the rug. But we can't have that. And that's why we got to open an independent audit on day one to uncover what else has gone wrong, hold anyone who's complicit in this wrongdoing accountable, because we got to restore trust in the office before we accomplish any of the policy things that I want to accomplish, because people are not going to buy into the policy agenda if they feel like the office is infested with corruption and insider dealing. So we got to clean it up, and that's going to be through the independent audit.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's for sure an iceberg. We don't know really the whole truth of what's going on. Is there possibility for the Secretary of State's office to be able to kind of manage and at least keep tabs on maybe some corruption that's going on in other state offices or forcing other state offices to be more transparent, or are you only really totally in control of that office in particular?
This is a really important question, Ben. So one of the things I do as a lawyer is I practice antitrust law, and it's one of the oldest federal laws on the books. Right? We have a system of laws in our country which ban monopolies, and there's a reason for that.
Mhm.
If you have, let's say, you live in a town where there's one convenience store, If there's one store in town, they can charge you whatever price they want. There's no incentive to have better products, better customer service, right? When there's no competition in state government, the same is true. When you have a single group Republican control for 20 years, they feel like they can buy the luxury SUV and get away with it. They can hire their family members. They can build the helipad, even though they're worth all this money in their backyard. They can build the highway at the taxpayer expense. It's going to benefit their company, right? If there's
Mhm.
no one calling this stuff out, if they're all part of the same, group of people, then they feel like they can get away with that. But this is why it's important to get someone with an independent mind in there that's not going to be part of the same team that they are, who's going to be able to have the freedom to call out some of the waste, the corruption, the abuse of the taxpayer. So I'm not going to limit myself to calling out corruption just in this office. I'm going to call it out where I see it because that's my obligation as an elected official to our state.
Yeah. So I'm kind of hearing like you would be almost like a check on the
Yeah,
Republican legislator, on the Republicans' government power, and
one,
you are part of the government, so it'd be pretty
yeah.
effective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a watchdog in the state house. And look, man, like unfortunately, corruption doesn't. It's not limited to one party, right? We got to be able to
Mhm.
call it out where we see it, regardless of whether it's on the Democratic side or the Republican side. Like we just can't tolerate that in our state government. So it's not. I will call out corruption in all of its forms, regardless of the political party that it originates from.
Right. Yeah. Whenever you see it, for sure. So if you were elected, you'd probably you'd be the most prominent elected Democrat. Um, and you would occupy the highest statewide office. Is there a responsibility for leadership while you hold that office within the Democratic Party, but then also to the rest of the state? Really, what does that look like for you, that leadership responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'll be assuming a leadership role. That's not something that's new to me. In the Marine Corps, I was in charge of the lives of hundreds of people, and that's a pretty weighty responsibility. And so I want to bring some of that leadership experience to this office to deliver for people and to be a good messenger in our state. We got to deliver on the things that people care about in our state, making life more affordable, not giving handouts and tax cuts to the richest and cutting benefits for the poorest, not letting public schools close in our state and handing out these vouchers to wealthy people to subsidize their kids' private education, not letting hospitals close in the rural parts of our state, right? And so, of course, I'm going to lead on all of those issues that I think are important to me. And that hopefully will create more balance in our state government and force some negotiation on some of these issues. Because one of the big problems in our state government right now with single group control, super majority control of state government, is there's no incentive on the Republican side to actually negotiate and form some principled compromise on some of these issues. And I think regardless of which side of the aisle you come from, I think we can all agree that a little bit more balance and competition and negotiation would be good. Because really, I mean, look, like politics is just like any other area of life. What other area of life would you expect and be okay with getting 100% of your way all the time, right? In business, we wouldn't expect that. In personal relationships, we wouldn't expect that. And why should it be any different in politics? You should have to work with people to represent all of the people of your state and not just take a hard line tact on every issue, because it's not truly representing the folks of your state.
Right. Yeah, you have to have cooperation. You have to be willing to work across the aisle. Gianni, I think you had a follow-up to a previous question you want to go ahead and ask.
Yeah, I was just curious about when we're talking about corruption in other offices, right? How would you work with other offices as one of the very few Democratic leaders elected? Indiana has historically been a very red state. So how would you work with other branches of government to make sure that they are staying afloat and staying aligned with what Hoosiers want and need, if you will?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I always found that, in my professional life and personal life, the best way that you can create consensus and get people to buy in to your program or your ideas is just don't be too worried about who takes the credit. And so if, the governor or the attorney general would like to partner with me on conducting an independent of this office to root out the corruption and the insider dealing, I don't care if they take credit for it. All I care about is that we're not having a corruption that's pervading our state government, right? And so the best way I've found to create buy-in is you just bring in people and let them take the credit for a good idea. So that's one. Two, a lot of the policy reforms that I'd like to see, particularly with respect to the way our elections are handled in our state, will require will necessarily require some legislative cooperation. The way that our elections are handled is a function of state law. And so, as an executive officer of our state, I can't by myself change state law, but what I can do is advocate for more common sense reforms. So, for example, one of the things that I'd love to do with the help of the state legislature is end straight ticket voting in our state. We're one of only 6 states in the country which allows this. And what this means is the first page of your ballot is not a list of names or offices. It's just political parties, red team, blue team. And in a state like ours, which you mentioned has traditionally been more red, what that means is that there's not a whole lot of competition in state politics, and a lack of competition has led us to the place where we are, where we have single group control. There's some unreasonable outcomes, and there's this corruption and insider dealing that's taken hold because there's no accountability, right? So I think if we end straight ticket voting, that would increase competition in our elections, which would create more balance and a more accountable state government. And the reason I mention that is that there were 2 Republican state senators during this past legislative session that introduced a bill to do just that and end straight ticket voting. So there's at least some appetite across the aisle for that type of reform, right? So of course, I'm going to work with members of whatever party in our state legislature to accomplish on that initiative and so many others.
Yeah, I think if straight ticket voting didn't exist anymore in Indiana, I think people would be surprised about who the state could elect. Um, so it's definitely a virtuous thing to go about trying to solve. Um, Connor, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the stakes for young people in this race? How does this office affect us? Yeah.
Yeah, look, so we mentioned the student ID ban kind of closer to the start of this show, and that's a big deal, right? Like I want more young people in our great universities in our state to be able to participate in our elections. And look, like there's been no evidence. They've not produced any evidence. They've not even alluded to the existence of any evidence that young people are somehow there's fraudulent voting using student IDs. It just doesn't exist. And the proof of that is, who was a big advocate of student ID voting when he was Secretary of State? Todd Rokita. So this is something that he's completely flip-flopped on for political reasons. And he clearly thought it was good policy back then and doesn't now, and not because there's been widespread fraud. He doesn't even hint at the existence of that, right? So like I want more young people to get involved in our electoral process. That means making it easier for them to participate in our elections. That means involving them in my own campaign. We have a great group of young volunteers and staff on this campaign. That means going to where they are, to college campuses, to talk about some of the biggest issues that young people are facing, and that's affordability. That's am I going to have a good job with the kind of advancement of AI and displacing a lot of white collar jobs, or at least it will in the next 15 and 20 years. So those are the issues that we need to confront as a state. Those are also the issues that young people really care about. And so I believe, this office is in charge of handling our elections. If we have more participation from younger voices in that process, then we're going to produce better policy that's going to address some of the issues that young people are facing, because there's going to be more people with skin in the game in the process.
Yeah, I think that that's a good transition because I think I remember Diego Morales had done a audit of the voter rolls recently. I believe they said they found, what was it, one case of voter fraud, and they spent a couple $1 million just to find one case of voter fraud over the past several years. So, I mean, like you were mentioning, there's no evidence of students, for example, coming here and, voting fraudulently. But kind of leading into more of like a general youth perspective. So, like one thing I have, and I'm sure many of my fellow co-hosts have, and perhaps yourself too, heard from our friends, is that the sort of feeling that our voices, our votes don't matter because, we're one out of a couple million voters. Why does it matter? And on top of this, Indiana already ranks among the lowest states in the entire country in terms of voter turnout. What steps, if elected, would you take to kind of boost voter turnout across the state for everyone?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's important that we don't give in to that cynicism, because every vote does matter. Every voice does matter. And so there's a few things that I'd like to do. One, I'd like to use this office as a means of advertising the importance of our elections, the importance of our democratic process, and getting more voices involved. Right now, it's being used for the opposite of that. And you hinted at that, restricting the process, getting people kicked off of the voter rules. And so I want, just ideologically, I want more people participating. I want to use this office to advertise the importance of our elections and getting more people registered and also participating, because you're right, we have one of the lowest participation rates in the country. Then there are some things that I'd like to do, big structural reforms to the way that our elections are handled. That's going to allow people to more directly participate. Probably most important, I would love to see here in Indiana, just like Ohio, Florida, and Missouri have, a citizen-led ballot referendum. What this means is that on your ballot, you would not just have candidates running for office, you would also have big questions that we're all facing, that we're all very energized around on your ballot. And not only do I think that that would create more common sense policy, because a lot of the folks in the state legislature are bought off by special interests and they're not looking out for the majority of Hoosiers. And that's led to some bad policy and some things. But it also would really motivate people, not just young people, but everyone in our state to get off their couch and into their polling place. Because one of the major things I hear, Connor, and you mentioned this a little bit, is that people just think their voice doesn't matter and their vote doesn't matter. So what's a good way for remedying that? Give them a direct say on some of the biggest issues of the day, right? Because they might be able to say that their state rep, their state senator, they're not listening to me. They don't have my best interest in mind. Okay, let's put a big question on the ballot, like the gerrymandering thing, for example, we went through toward the back end of last year. I trust the 5 million registered Hoosier voters to make big decisions like that. That's going to get our participation up, and that's going to get more people involved in our process.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer because yeah, I mean that's the problem too. I think a lot of my like friends face too is this feeling of yeah, no, like I can't really affect big change because we don't have those ballot questions. And I think that that's something that's like been a wall for a lot of good ideas in the states that it's never been allowed to be voted on by the people because it's unconstitutional as of right now. Now, my next question is kind of focusing again, younger voters and those first-time voters. So many high school graduates, go through and graduate high school without good understanding of how local government or elections work. Do you think the Secretary of State has a role in civic education? And if so, what does that look like?
Of course, this office should have a role in civic education. Also, I'd like to see a robust, strong public education system that can do that as well, right? So it's both things. We need to have great, well funded public schools in our state that can provide that great foundation of civic education for the kids graduating high school. And then this office can be there as a backstop to fill in the gaps and get people educated about the importance of our democratic process, and then get people involved and highlight things already out there that get young people involved. For example, there's something called the Hoosier Hall Pass program in our state, which allows people in high schools throughout our state under the age of 18 to work at their local polling place and get involved at the actual ground floor of our elections process if they get all the signups from their teachers and all that. So I want to use this office to advertise projects like that, programs like that already exist that get young people involved, and then create more that would just get people involved in the process. And I look forward to doing that.
Now, kind of shifting a bit away to more of a state of the race, kind of, where your head is. With Diego Morales, our current Secretary of State, no longer being the Republican nominee, how does that kind of change the campaign from your perspective?
Look, my message is the same. Like, this office has been consumed by corruption, insider dealing, and incompetence. And so Hoosiers will have a choice in November. We can have more of the same, more of the corruption, more of the waste, more of the insider dealing, more of that with Max Engling, because he's shown no inclination that he wants to get rid of that for a lot of reasons. Or we can have fundamental change. We can have something better where the taxpayer is being respected, where we're using this office to expand participation in our democratic process and not restrict it, where we're having, just people are their time and their money is being valued. That's what we can have: good government, honest leadership, or we can get more of the same. And so at the end of the day, Hoosiers will have a very clear choice in November: change, fundamental change for the better, or more of the same, more of the insider dealing, more of the corruption, more of the single group control that's led us down this path. And I think Hoosiers will receive that message well.
And then, kind of in a similar vein, adding on to that, with it looking likely that Greg Ballard's going to get onto the ballot as an independent, and with that poll that came out last year, kind of showing it to be kind of a close three-way race. Granted, that was with Diego, but still. How do you think, extra options might affect the race too? How does that look from your perspective? Kind of what are some thought processes behind that?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure about the political calculus of a new entrant to the race. What I will say is that I think more choices are a good thing. I think more competition generally is a good thing. One of the main thing, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, guys, but one of the main things that I hear from young people is that they don't like either party, right? They just throw their hands up and they say, all these people are corrupt, they're all bought off, and no one's taking an independent mind with respect to any issue, and they're just voting the party line on everything, right? And so I think I welcome Mayor Ballard to the race. I agree with what he's trying to do, providing more choices, more competition. I think that's a good thing. That's one of the reasons why I hope we can end single group control of our state government, because more competition breeds more accountability. But we'll see what ends up happening. And I hope he shares my goal of cleaning up corruption in this office. I've not heard him say that yet, but I hope he comes around to that.
I think you bring up a good point too about people hearing like a certain political party and then just kind of having an association in your mind about what that means, even if you know the candidates are all different, their views and perspectives. What is that conversation like around the state? Have you been pretty well received in traditionally pretty Republican areas? And then you just kind of want to hear about that a little.
Yeah, I look, it's good, and there's always going to be a certain amount of people that are set in strident partisanship, right? And they under no circumstances will have an open mind to voting for anyone that doesn't have the same letter in front of their name on the ballot. That exists, unfortunately. But Hoosiers are open-minded for the most part, and they just want honest, good government, and they're willing to listen to you and be reasonable, even if you don't agree on everything. But if you agree on the most important things in their daily lives, then they'll listen to you. And so I found that to be the case, even with some of the folks on the other side of the aisle. We've had tremendous support from Republicans and independents. I'm going to continue to talk to Republicans and independents, not just Democrats, because we're going to need their support to ultimately be successful. And I want to be the Secretary of State of every Hoosier, not just Democrats or Republicans, but every Hoosier, right? And that's my obligation as a statewide elected official. And I look forward to just getting on the campaign trail and talking to everybody.
Perfect, perfect. Well, I think next we're going to move over to our rapid fire questions. So I got two, and then I'll turn it over to my co-host. So first off, who is your greatest inspiration in your life?
Oh, my greatest inspiration in my life would be my mom, Susan Bayh, and she unfortunately passed away from brain cancer about 5 years ago. But it's no matter who you are in life, how much money you have, where you come from, everyone at some point will deal with loss like that. It's one of the silver linings of a tragic loss is that it is a common thing that binds all Americans or every human being together. No matter, we're not invincible, and everyone's going to experience loss like that in our lives. And when my mom got sick, often it's said that true character is revealed not when things are going well, but when things are going, when things are tough. And so when she got sick, she had dozens of surgeries. It was dealing with insurmountable odds, a deadly disease that there was no cure for. And she had options. She could, be bitter and angry with the cards that she was dealt and ask, why is this happening to me? Or she could be who she really was at her core, a loving, caring person who never once asked, why is this happening to me, but used the short time she had left on this planet to show her love, not just for my family, but for everyone else in her life. And that will always inspire me. Just the way that she handled adversity in a really hard situation when she didn't have to. I always, whenever I'm going through something in my life that I think is hard, I always remember what she had to go through and the kind of mentality that she took to that fight.
Okay, and then I'll be quick with this next one. And thank you for that. That was a very heartwarming response.
I know
Say
you're
you're
supposed to. It's like a one word thing, or and that's a little bit of a soliloquy, but yeah.
sorry. What is you're saying you meet a 20-year-old version of yourself again with all the experiences you have now? What's one piece of advice you would give to that younger version of yourself?
I spent a lot of time when I was 20 in college worrying about if everything was going to work out. And I think that stress and anxiety, worrying about the future, is better spent uh, with what's right in front of you on a daily basis. How can I be the best person in this day, in the next 10 minutes, in the next hour? How can I tackle the challenges that are facing me right now? And if you do that over and over and over again, it'll always work out. It'll always work out. If you do your best, if you work your hardest, if you keep at the front of your mind the reasons for why you're doing things, if you try and help people who are struggling in life, if you keep those things at the forefront every day, then don't worry about the future because it'll work out the way it's supposed to. I spent a lot of time when I was younger worrying about if everything was going to go perfectly. By the way, it's never going to go perfectly. There are always going to be wrenches thrown into things. There's always going to be challenges to overcome, and your time is better spent worrying about how to overcome those things in the present rather than thinking 10 steps ahead.
Well, yeah, thanks so much, Bo. I will go ahead and transition into my rapid fire questions. So thanks for those thoughtful responses. First question, what's one Indiana place everyone should visit at least once?
That's a great question. I mean, there's so many good options. You have the dunes up north, which is beautiful. Brown
Mhm.
County is amazing in southern Indiana, Nashville. I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to go ahead and say French Lick, Indiana. I don't know if folks have been to French Lick. I think it's a really hidden, it's a real good hidden gem in our state. There's, if you like golf, there's beautiful golf courses there, natural aspects of around Orange County that are beautiful, really hilly part of our state, wooded areas. I really love being out in nature. I love camping, hiking, fishing, those types of things. So that's a very beautiful area of our state, but there's a lot of good ones to choose from.
I'm glad you mentioned French Lick because we got a pretty famous Hoosier from French Lick, and that kind of leads me into my next question. I'm an Indiana kid, Hoosier through and through. I would cut my right arm off for an Indiana national championship in basketball.
Yeah.
I don't know about football. I'm glad we won it, but basketball's where my heart is at. Um, my question for you is, who's your favorite Hoosier athlete of all time? And that can either be someone born in Indiana or an athlete that just has a lot of connection to the state.
Yeah, so obviously Larry Bird is just amazing. Went to Indiana State, where my family's originally from Terre Haute, so that's amazing. He's from French Lick, as you mentioned, Ben, superstar. But I would have to go. Sounds like you're more of a basketball guy. When I was growing up, the Colts were just amazing, and so like growing up, Peyton Manning was just a hero of mine. I would listen on the radio to every Colts game with my dad and my brother, and so I used to go to Colts training camp every year growing up when they had it in Anderson. And so I got to, sign some of the towels for me and things like that, some footballs and things like that. So he's just a hero of mine. Peyton Manning would probably be my all time, or Dallas Clark. I love Dallas Clark too.
There you go. Yeah, no, the sheriff. When you think of Indy,
Yeah.
I think of the sheriff. So that's a good one. All right. Well, Bo, thank you so much for the conversation. If people want to get involved in your campaign, where's the best place they can find you at?
Yeah, so our website is just beaubayh.com. On that website, you'll see there's a volunteer tab. Sign up to volunteer. There's going to be a time in this campaign where we're going to have to mobilize the get out the vote effort. People are going to have to knock on. I would love for people to knock on doors, pass out literature, do phone banking, all those types of things. We already have a great group of young people involved in this campaign. I want to continue that. So please sign up to volunteer there. We're on all social media, TikTok, X, Instagram, Facebook, just at Beau Bayh. If you could follow us, share, like the content, that would mean a lot too.
Awesome. Well, I want to wish everybody a happy and safe 4th of July weekend here coming up. Bo, thank you once again. And yeah,
Thank you all
that's
so
good.
Thanks,
much.
everybody.
NextGen IN is the property of Black Pro IT Solutions and Black Pro Studios. Executive producer, Indiana's own Dana Black. Music by Omar Farouk from Pixabay.